I'm Amy Martin, and this is my leadership analysis presentation on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Well, in his early life, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was born in 1906 to Paula and Karl Bonhoeffer. Karl was a psychiatrist, and his mother, Paula, was a teacher. He had a very privileged life, even though he did grow up during World War I. His mother and father were said to be selfless, and they were always helping people. And this became central to the Bonhoeffer's family culture. And I believe this paved the way for Bonhoeffer to decide to become a theologian at the age of 13 years old. He stayed on this path throughout college to become a theologian. He was able to think both critically and scientifically about problems. He was highly intellectual and said to be somewhat of an introvert, not because he didn't enjoy social interaction, but because he just enjoyed reading and studying, and also being in constant prayer in whatever decisions that he was making. Early on in Bonhoeffer's life, he had a dream or a hope for the church to become universal. The church would not be separated by race or any barrier, and anyone and everyone could be a part of the universal church. During this time that Bonhoeffer had this vision for the church was the time that Adolf Hitler began to rise in Germany through the political ranks. So Bonhoeffer's vision for the church was on the complete opposite end of the spectrum compared to Adolf Hitler's view of the church. Hitler wanted Germany and the Church of Germany to be one race. His goal was to purify Germany and to have a single race. So early on, Bonhoeffer began to model the way for his congregation, his colleagues, and his friends by setting an example that the church needed to be universal and be opposed to Hitler's views during this time. He inspired a shared vision for those who didn't view Hitler's views during this time. He did this through public radio, and he did this through his sermons to his congregation. Bonhoeffer challenged the process during Hitler's regime by having a prophetic voice and by leading the charge for the church to break away during the Nazis' regime, when they started to infiltrate the Germany churches with Nazi ideology. Bonhoeffer was able to break away from the church and have his own congregation for some time, where he was able to publicly speak out against Hitler's views and try to change people's minds and to get people to think critically about what Adolf Hitler was wanting to do to Germany during this time. He enabled others to act by encouraging them to really think about Hitler and his ideology, and if it was right or wrong, and not just to follow someone, to have your own viewpoint and to have your own opinion, and to not look at Hitler as being the savior of the world, but looking at Jesus Christ being the savior of the world. He was eventually arrested on conspiracy charges. During this time when he broke away from the church, he was secretly meeting with family members and other co-conspirators who wanted to assassinate Hitler. And during this ultimately caused him to be arrested. And during the time when he was arrested and placed in a Nazi concentration camp, he was said to be a great comfort to the inmates there as well as the guards. And this was the way that he was able to encourage the heart of these inmates and giving them comfort and to the guards. He also wrote letters of encouragement to his family members. Even though it was very dangerous for them to receive any letters of any kind and for him to write them, he continued to write letters of encouragement to them to not give up and to ultimately assassinate Hitler. All throughout his life, the theme that I saw constantly running through anything that he did, his leadership roles, he practiced the theory of servant leadership. At one point in his life, Bonhoeffer traveled to America, and during this time, he was able to show empathy. He traveled to Harlem every day and joined an African American congregation, and he began to see the persecutions and civil rights movements of the African Americans in America during this time. He was able to feel empathy for the African Americans, and it's debated if during this time that he was in America, if that's when he really started to understand what was happening to the Jewish people back in his own home of Germany. He had foresight. Early on, he warned people of Hitler using his voice and his speech. He knew what was coming and the havoc that Hitler could wreak on Germany. Conceptualization. Bonhoeffer having this big perspective of the church and wanting it to be universal and not segregated by race. And he showed stewardship as well for always caring for others. At one point, when Bonhoeffer had broken away from the church and he was still speaking publicly to his congregation and on public radio in opposition against Hitler, he started to realize that it was becoming too dangerous as the war was beginning to escalate. So by caring for others, he ended up leaving his congregation and not speaking out against Hitler anymore, because he knew that he was on the verge of risking the lives of his own congregation. He is continued to be an inspiration to theologians, to intellectuals, to leaders, both in the Christian sect and non-Christian sect. So he has inspired leaders of all beliefs. And this concludes my leadership analysis presentation on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Thank you.